The Whispering Portrait, Part 1. Chapter 1, The Arrival at Blackveil Manor. A bitter wind howled through the barren moors as Lenora Ashbourne stepped down from the creaking carriage, her gloved hands clutching the edges of her woolen cloak. The night was thick with mist, curling around the iron gates of Blackveil Manor like ghostly fingers, obscuring the silhouette of the house beyond. The moment her boots touched the damp gravel, a sense of unease slithered through her, settling like a cold weight in her chest. A lone lantern flickered by the entrance, held aloft by a gaunt man in a dark tailcoat. His face was gaunt and pale, his sharp features shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "You are Miss Ashbourne?" His voice was as thin and lifeless as the wind. Lenora straightened her spine. "Yes, I am here to take my post as governess." The man, whom she later learned was Mr. Fletcher, the manor's steward, gave a stiff nod before turning toward the towering double doors. Their blackened wood bore the weight of centuries, the iron handles rusted from age and rain. He pushed them open, revealing the candlelit expanse of the entrance hall. Lenora stepped inside, shaking off the chill that clung to her cloak. The manor was grand but worn, its velvet drapes heavy with dust, its chandeliers dulled by time. A large portrait of a stern-looking man loomed above the grand staircase, his painted eyes seemingly watching her every move. "Lord Ravenshade will see you in the drawing room," Mr. Fletcher announced before vanishing down a dimly lit corridor. Left alone, Lenora let her gaze drift across the hall. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, damp wood, and something else, something faintly floral yet decayed. She stepped forward, the sound of her boots echoing against the polished floors, each step swallowed by the silence of the house. The drawing room door was slightly ajar. She hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, by the firelight's glow, stood Lord Sebastian Ravenshade. He was a man of striking presence, his raven black hair streaked with silver at the temples, his dark eyes as unreadable as the storm outside. He regarded her with quiet intensity before gesturing to a chair opposite him. "You must be Miss Ashbourne," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I am, my lord." He studied her in the dim firelight before nodding. "You will find that Blackveil is not like other places. It keeps its secrets well." A shiver passed through her at his words. "I am prepared for whatever my duties require. You will be tending to my daughter, Evangeline. She is a delicate child. She speaks little and listens too much." Lenora tilted her head. "Listens to what, my lord?" He hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he rose from his chair. "I will have her nursemaid introduce you in the morning. Until then, you may retire to your chamber. You must be weary from your journey." Lenora stood, curtsying slightly before stepping toward the door. Yet just as she reached for the handle, a sudden whisper brushed against her ear. It was too soft to be real, too fleeting to be a mere trick of the wind. She turned sharply, but Lord Ravenshade had not moved. His expression, however, had darkened. "Good night, Miss Ashbourne," he said softly. With a quick nod, Lenora stepped into the corridor, her pulse quickening. As she walked toward the staircase, the whispers returned, floating from the hallway beyond the grand staircase, from behind a door she had not noticed before. It was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. And in that darkness, something moved. Lenora did not linger. She forced herself up the stairs, ignoring the prickling sensation creeping along her spine. She had barely begun her first night at Blackveil Manor. And already, the house was whispering to her. Chapter 2, The Forbidden Wing. The wind howled against the stone walls of Blackveil Manor, rattling the window panes like ghostly fingers tapping for entry. Lenora Ashbourne lay awake in her four-poster bed, listening to the creaks and sighs of the ancient house. The heavy velvet curtains surrounding her bed stirred ever so slightly, though the room was devoid of any breeze. It was not the storm outside that troubled her. It was the whisper she had heard just before retiring, the breathy, spectral voice that had slipped against her ear like a lover's secret. She had tried to convince herself it was only fatigue, a trick of her tired mind after the long journey. But as she lay there, heart beating steadily against the silence, she could not deny the truth. Something in this house was watching her. The great clock in the hallway outside struck 3, its deep chimes rolling through the manor like distant thunder. Lenora turned onto her side, determined to sleep, but the moment she closed her eyes, the whisper came again. Lenora. She sat up abruptly, breath catching in her throat. The sound was faint, yet unmistakable. It was coming from the hallway. She hesitated only a moment before slipping from the warmth of her bed, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cold wooden floor. Grabbing her oil lamp from the bedside table, she lit it with trembling fingers. The soft glow barely pushed back the shadows as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and made her way toward the door. The corridor stretched before her in eerie silence, the candle sconces flickering against the damp-stained wallpaper. The portraits lining the hallway stared at her with sightless eyes, their gilded frames dull with dust. Lenora took a step forward, her breath shallow. A soft gust of air whispered past her, though no window was open. Her gaze traveled down the corridor to the staircase, and beyond it, to the door she had seen earlier that evening. The one she could have sworn had been slightly ajar. Now, it stood wide open. Beyond the threshold, a long, dark hallway stretched into the unknown, its edges swallowed by shadow. The forbidden wing. Lenora hesitated. Lord Ravenshade had given her a warning. She had been in the house for less than a day and had already felt the unspoken tension that hung over it like a funeral shroud. And yet, something in her ached to cross that threshold. Steeling herself, she moved forward, the light from her lamp trembling with every step. The air grew colder as she entered the passage, and the scent of dust and old wood filled her lungs. The hallway was lined with portraits, their canvases veiled in dust and neglect. Some were nearly indistinguishable beneath the layers of grime, their once grand frames tarnished and cracked. As she walked, she swore she could hear something, not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. A murmur. The sound seemed to come from the end of the corridor, where the moonlight filtered through a stained glass window, casting fractured colors onto the floor. A single door stood there, slightly ajar. Lenora reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the handle. The brass was ice cold, as though no human hand had touched it in decades. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, but as she lifted her lamp, the golden glow illuminated a massive portrait hanging on the far wall. A woman. She was tall and slender, her midnight blue gown rippling like the sea, its fabric shimmering with an otherworldly sheen. Her pale hands rested delicately in her lap, adorned with rings that had long since lost their luster. But it was her face that held Lenora captive. She was beautiful, tragically so. Her features were delicate, almost haunted, her dark eyes filled with an unbearable sadness. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she had been caught in the middle of speaking, or gasping her final breath. Beneath the painting, a nameplate glinted in the lamplight. Clara Ravenshade. Lenora felt her pulse quicken. The whispers grew louder. "Help me." The voice was inside the room. Lenora spun around, her lamp quivering in her grasp. The room was empty, only dust-covered furniture, long-forgotten trinkets, and decayed velvet drapes swaying slightly in the unseen breeze. Yet she felt a presence. She turned back to the painting, and for a moment, just a moment, she swore that Clara's sorrowful eyes shifted. Not the trick of candlelight. Not her imagination. The woman's painted gaze locked onto hers. Lenora gasped, stumbling backward. Her boot struck the edge of a loose floorboard, sending a sharp creak through the silence. As the echoes faded, she realized. The whispering had stopped. The room was utterly, deathly silent. Lenora swallowed, pressing a hand to her chest to steady her breathing. She had to leave. Now. Forcing herself to move, she turned on her heel, stepping hurriedly back into the corridor. As she reached the threshold, she cast one final glance at the portrait. Clara Ravenshade's expression remained frozen, unchanged. But this time, Lenora noticed something she had not before. Beneath the portrait, embedded into the frame, was a series of deep scratches. They marred the wood, almost frantic in their erratic pattern. and they looked as though they had been made by fingernails. With a shudder, Lenora turned and fled down the corridor, not stopping until she was safely back in her chamber. She bolted the door behind her, pressed her back against it, and clutched at her pounding heart. She had crossed into the forbidden wing. She had seen the portrait of Clara Ravenshade. And now, she knew with certainty. Clara had seen her, too. Chapter 3, The Midnight Gown. Sleep did not come easily to Lenora Ashbourne. Even after she had bolted her chamber door, even after she had wrapped herself tightly in her blankets, her mind refused to release the night's events. The image of Clara Ravenshade's portrait burned behind her closed eyelids, the midnight blue gown, the sorrowful dark eyes, the whisper that had not belonged to the wind. Outside, the storm had settled into a restless murmur. The branches of the gnarled trees scratched against the window panes, and somewhere in the depths of Blackveil Manor, a door creaked softly, as though someone had just stepped through it. A part of her told her it was merely the shifting bones of the old house. Another part of her knew better. When at last exhaustion overtook her, she drifted into uneasy slumber. She was standing in the forbidden wing. The corridor stretched before her in endless darkness, the dust-laden air thick with the scent of roses, sweet, yet decayed. The only source of light came from the open doorway at the end of the hall, spilling a cold, silver glow into the gloom. Her bare feet moved soundlessly over the wooden floor. She did not know why she walked, only that she must. As she reached the open doorway, she stepped inside and saw it again, the portrait. But this time, something was different. The woman in the painting was no longer seated. She stood at the forefront of the canvas, her midnight gown billowing, her pale hands reaching outward. Her lips, so sorrowful before, were now parted slightly, as though she was about to speak. Lenora's breath hitched. The air was thick with silence, so heavy it pressed against her ears. Then, very faintly, a whisper. "Wear it." Lenora's pulse quickened. She stepped back, but her foot hit something soft. Slowly, hesitantly, she looked down. The midnight gown from the painting lay on the floor before her. Rich fabric pooled like ink spilled upon the wooden boards. "Wear it." The whisper came again, closer this time. A sudden chill enveloped her, raising the hairs on her arms. Her breath misted before her lips, and as she watched, the fabric of the gown shifted. It was subtle. A small ripple, like the stirring of water. And then, it moved. Lenora gasped as the gown crawled toward her, the fabric writhing like something alive, tendrils of silk reaching for her ankles. She tried to turn, to flee, but unseen hands clutched at her wrists, held her fast. And then she felt it, cold fingers brushing against her throat. "Wear it." Lenora screamed, and woke. She sat up with a jolt, her breath ragged, her nightgown damp with sweat. The room was pitch black, save for the flickering embers in the fireplace. The storm had passed, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow. Just a dream. But was it? A chill ran down her spine, and she froze. Because something was different. Something was in the room with her. Slowly, she turned her head toward the foot of the bed. Her breath caught in her throat. There, draped over the old wooden chair, was the midnight gown from the painting. Lenora's pulse thundered in her ears. The gown was pristine, untouched by dust or decay. The fabric shimmered faintly in the dim light, its deep blue hue so dark it was almost black. The sleeves were long and delicate, trimmed with silver embroidery that matched the gown Clara Ravenshade had worn in the portrait. She could not move. Could not breathe. Had someone placed it there while she slept? A more chilling thought crept into her mind, had it appeared on its own? "Wear it." The whisper shivered through the darkness, so close she could feel its breath on her ear. Lenora bolted from the bed, nearly tripping as she stumbled away from the chair. Her hands fumbled for the lamp, fingers trembling as she struck a match and lit the wick. Warm, golden light filled the room, chasing away the shadows. But the gown remained. No longer a vision. No longer a dream. Real. Lenora swallowed, trying to steady her thoughts. She needed to think rationally. Someone must have placed it there, a servant, perhaps. It was possible that the gown had been stored in the manor's old wardrobes and was laid out for her to wear. Yes. That had to be it. And yet, something deep within her recoiled from the gown, from the unnatural way it glowed in the lamplight, from the way it looked almost expectant. She hesitated, then reached out, fingertips brushing the fabric. It was ice cold. Not the coolness of silk untouched by warmth, but the biting chill of something that had been left outside in winter's grasp. Lenora pulled her hand back, her skin prickling. A sudden knock at the door made her gasp. Miss Ashbourne? The voice belonged to Mrs. Hargrave, the housekeeper. Lenora took a shaky breath before responding. Why, yes? A pause. Then, Lord Ravenshade requests your presence at breakfast. Lenora cast one last glance at the gown before striding toward the door. When she opened it, Mrs. Hargrave's sharp gaze flickered over her face. Did you sleep well, miss? Lenora hesitated. Quite well, she lied. Mrs. Hargrave said nothing, but Lenora could not shake the feeling that the woman knew. That she had expected her not to. As she made her way down to the breakfast room, she could not rid herself of a single, suffocating thought: the dream had been a warning. The gown had appeared for a reason. And somewhere within Blackveil Manor, Clara Ravenshade was watching her, waiting. And whispering. Chapter 4, Evangeline's Secrets. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Blackveil Manor, casting long, gold-tinted shadows along the walls. The storm from the night before had passed, but the manor's silence was unchanged, thick and oppressive. Lenora Ashbourne descended the grand staircase with measured steps, her mind still troubled by the midnight gown that had appeared in her chamber. She had left it untouched, draped over the chair as she had found it, but the memory of it lingered, cold against her skin. When she reached the breakfast room, the heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Lord Sebastian Ravenshade sat at the head of the long dining table, his expression unreadable. He looked up as she entered, his dark gaze settling on her as though searching for something. Miss Ashbourne. I trust you found your accommodation suitable? Lenora hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, my lord. The room is most comfortable. Good. His voice was quiet, but there was something in his tone, something weighted. Have you met Evangeline yet? Lenora shook her head. No, my lord. She will join us shortly. The conversation fell into silence. The breakfast table was grand yet sparsely set. A silver platter held fresh bread, fruit, and a pot of tea. Lord Ravenshade took his meal in quiet contemplation, and Lenora followed his lead, though she found little appetite. She was about to inquire further about Evangeline when soft footsteps approached the doorway. Lenora turned just as the little girl appeared. Evangeline Ravenshade was no more than 8 years old, a small, delicate child with ashen blonde hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes, strikingly dark for someone so fair, held an expression that was both solemn and distant. She did not rush toward her father, nor did she greet Lenora with the shy curiosity most children displayed upon meeting someone new. Instead, she simply stood there, silent and unmoving. Lord Ravenshade gestured toward her. Evangeline, this is Miss Ashbourne. She will be your new governess. Evangeline did not reply. Lenora offered her a gentle smile, trying to suppress the unease creeping along her spine. It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Evangeline. Still, the child said nothing. Instead, her gaze shifted past Lenora's shoulder, toward something unseen behind her. Lenora's breath caught. The hair at the nape of her neck prickled. Slowly, she turned, but there was nothing there. When she faced Evangeline again, the child had tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes still fixed on the same empty space. Lord Ravenshade cleared his throat. Evangeline. Sit. At last, the little girl moved, stepping forward with slow, deliberate steps. She took her place at the table, but she did not eat. Instead, she lifted a delicate hand and began tracing invisible patterns on the surface of the table with her fingertip. The motion was absent-minded, repetitive, as though she had done it many times before. Lord Ravenshade seemed unbothered, but Lenora could not shake the feeling that Evangeline was somehow elsewhere. "She does not speak much," Lord Ravenshade said suddenly, as if sensing Lenora's thoughts. "She was not always so quiet, but in recent months," his jaw tightened. "She has grown withdrawn." Lenora studied the child carefully. "Has she experienced some great distress, my lord?" He hesitated. "Perhaps. It is difficult to say." Lenora glanced at Evangeline once more, watching as her small finger continued to trace the table's surface. A spiral. Again and again, she drew it. A spiral. Lenora's breath caught as she recognized the pattern. The same deep scratches she had seen beneath Clara Ravenshade's portrait. She shuddered and forced herself to look away, lifting her teacup to her lips to mask her unease. Evangeline suddenly spoke, her voice soft and eerily distant. "Did you see her?" Lenora nearly dropped her cup. Lord Ravenshade stiffened. "Evangeline." The child ignored him, her dark gaze locking onto Lenora's. "Did you see her?" Lenora swallowed. "See whom, dear?" Evangeline blinked. "The lady in the blue dress." Lenora's fingers went cold. "The gown." "The portrait." "Clara Ravenshade." Evangeline knew. Lord Ravenshade set down his knife with a quiet clink. "That is enough, Evangeline." The child lowered her gaze. "I dream about her," she murmured, barely above a whisper. Silence fell over the table. Lenora felt her heartbeat quicken. "What do you mean, darling?" Evangeline's little hands folded in her lap. She did not look at her father. "She comes to me in my dreams. She stands at the foot of my bed." Lenora's stomach twisted. A presence. A whisper in the dark. The scent of something decayed yet floral. "She watches me," Evangeline continued, her voice quiet and almost serene, as if she were merely speaking of the weather. "And sometimes," she lifted her eyes, "she calls my name." A breath of wind slithered through the room, though the windows were shut. Lenora's skin prickled. "And do you answer her?" Evangeline hesitated. Then, very softly, "No. Because I think she is waiting for someone else." Lenora's hands clenched around the napkin in her lap. "Who?" Evangeline studied her for a long moment. Then, in that same quiet voice, she whispered, "You." A deep stillness fell over the room. Lenora did not dare look at Lord Ravenshade, for she knew that he was watching her. And for the first time since arriving at Blackveil Manor, she realized that whatever curse had plagued this house, it had not yet finished its work. It was only just beginning. Chapter 5, A Candle in the Dark. The oppressive silence of Blackveil Manor stretched long after breakfast had ended. Evangeline had been escorted away by her nursemaid, her small figure vanishing into the dim corridors. Lord Ravenshade had excused himself without another word, though not before giving Lenora a look that lingered, one that warned her. Of what, she could not say. And so she had been left alone. The great house loomed around her, its darkened hallways breathing with the weight of unseen things. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and aged wood, with just the barest trace of wilted roses. Lenora did not know why, but the scent unsettled her. She spent the afternoon wandering the estate grounds with carefully measured steps, as though something unseen walked alongside her. The cold wind tangled in her hair, the skeletal trees rustling like whispered voices. The house watched from a distance, its many windows reflecting the grey sky. And as dusk settled over the land, she found herself standing before the doors to the west wing. The forbidden wing. Her pulse quickened. She had not meant to return, not after the events of the previous night. And yet, something in her ached to step forward. Did you see her? Evangeline's words echoed in her mind. She comes to me in my dreams. A sharp gust of wind rattled the manor doors behind her, sending a deep shiver down her spine. The west wing remained eerily still. There was no sound. No breath of movement. But the door at the end of the hallway, the one leading to Clara Ravenshade's portrait, stood slightly open. A crack of darkness, waiting. Lenora pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. She could leave. She could turn back to her chambers, lock the door, and pretend she had never seen it. But she had made a mistake last night. She had run. And something told her that running would not save her. Steeling herself, she lifted the brass candlestick from the nearby table and struck a match. The flame flickered weakly, a fragile glow against the darkened corridor. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, she stepped inside. The air within the west wing was thick with dust and time. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching long and thin as Lenora moved forward, the candlelight flickering with every uncertain step. The portraits lined the corridor as before, their faded eyes watching her in silence. Some were cracked, their oil-painted faces barely visible beneath layers of neglect. But one painting stood untouched by time. At the end of the hallway, waiting in the cold glow of the moonlight, Clara Ravenshade's sorrowful gaze met hers. Lenora swallowed, gripping the candlestick tighter. The midnight gown. The haunted expression. The lips slightly parted, as though caught in a final breath. She had seen many portraits in her life, but none like this. None that felt alive. The whispers had been silent since she stepped into the corridor. No rustling of unseen movement, no breath of sound behind her. Yet somehow, she felt Clara's presence pressing against her skin. She forced herself to take a step forward. The air grew colder. Another step. The candle's flame wavered violently, flickering against an unseen draft. Another. Lenora was just a foot away now, so close that she could see the delicate brushstrokes upon the canvas. She should leave. She should turn back. But her hand lifted, reaching, trembling, a whisper sliced through the silence. He took everything from me. Lenora's breath caught. It was not her imagination. The voice was real, soft, mournful, and close. Her fingers froze inches from the painting. The candle's flame flickered wildly, and then, without warning, it went out. Darkness rushed in. Lenora gasped, stumbling back, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The darkness swallowed the room, thick and absolute. She turned sharply, struggling to see, but there was nothing. Nothing but the heavy, suffocating blackness. Her breath hitched. The whispers returned. He took everything from me. The words curled around her like cold fingers against her throat. And now he will take you, too. Lenora fled. She did not care where she was running, only that she must get away. She stumbled through the corridor, hands reaching blindly in the dark, the air growing impossibly cold. The whispers chased her, slipping through the silence like the rustling of silk. Then, a hand grabbed her wrist. She screamed. The grip was cold, ice cold, like death itself. Lenora struggled, gasping, but the fingers tightened, pulling her back, light. The corridor burst into illumination. Lenora nearly collapsed as warmth flooded over her, the darkness recoiling instantly. She turned, breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs. The whispers were gone. The corridor was empty. Her wrist throbbed, and she lifted her hand, staring at the reddened skin where the unseen grip had held her. A shadow flickered at the end of the hallway. And for a brief moment, before the darkness swallowed it once more, Lenora saw her. Standing just beyond the doorway, watching from the gloom. Clara Ravenshade. Not painted. Not trapped in the portrait. But real. Lenora did not move. Neither did Clara. Their eyes met across the corridor, one of the living, one of the dead. Then, Clara took a step forward. Lenora turned and fled. She did not stop running until she reached her chambers, slamming the door behind her. She bolted it shut, her chest heaving, her body trembling. The candle lay forgotten in her shaking hands, its wax dripping onto the wooden floor. For several long moments, she stood there, unable to move, unable to think. Then, slowly, she turned toward her dressing table. The mirror reflected her pale, terrified face. But she was not alone. Just behind her, standing at the foot of the bed, Clara Ravenshade stared back. The midnight gown clung to her frail frame, its fabric shimmering even in the darkness. Her eyes, so full of sorrow and pain, never left Lenora's. And then, very slowly, Clara raised a hand. Her fingers pointed to the bed. Lenora's stomach twisted with dread. She did not want to turn. She did not want to look. But she did. And what she saw made her blood turn to ice. Laid neatly upon the bed, as though waiting for her. The midnight gown. Waiting to be worn. And in that moment, Lenora knew, Clara was not finished with her yet. Chapter 6, Lord Ravenshade's Warning. The air in Lenora Ashbourne's chamber had turned unbearably heavy, thick with something unseen but suffocating. The midnight gown lay spread upon the bed, its deep blue fabric shimmering in the dim candlelight. It had not been there before. It had moved. Or worse, it had been placed there. By what hands? Or whose will? Lenora could not bring herself to touch it. The thought of her fingers brushing against that chilling fabric sent a deep, involuntary shudder through her. She backed away from the bed, her breath shallow. The room was deathly silent, save for the crackling of the dying embers in the hearth. But she was not alone. She could feel Clara Ravenshade watching her. Slowly, Lenora turned back toward the mirror. Clara was gone. Or, perhaps, she had never been there at all. But that gown had not placed itself. A sudden rap at the door shattered the stillness, making her gasp. The sound was sharp, commanding. Not hesitant. Not timid. Lenora swallowed her fear and crossed the room, hesitating for only a moment before unlocking the door. The moment she pulled it open, she was met with the brooding figure of Lord Sebastian Ravenshade. He stood in the dim corridor, his dark coat buttoned at the collar, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something tense. Concern? Warning? My lord, she asked, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. His gaze flickered past her into the chamber, lingering. Had he expected to see something? May I come in, Miss Ashbourne? Lenora hesitated, glancing once toward the midnight gown. She swiftly strode toward the bed and flung the heavy bedcover over it, concealing it from view. Then, composing herself, she stepped aside. Lord Ravenshade entered without a word, his boots quiet against the wooden floor. He surveyed the chamber with a piercing gaze before turning to face her. How long have you been in this house, Miss Ashbourne? He asked, folding his gloved hands behind his back. Lenora frowned. 2 days, my lord. 2 days, he repeated, almost to himself. His jaw tensed, as if something troubled him deeply. And in those 2 days, have you noticed anything unusual? Lenora's breath caught in her throat. The way he phrased it was careful, deliberate. He knew. He knew something was wrong. My lord, she hesitated. She should have lied, should have dismissed her own fears as foolish, but something in his demeanor told her that he would not be surprised. And so she said the words aloud, I saw her. Silence. Lord Ravenshade's expression did not shift, but the air around him changed. The flickering candlelight cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his features, the way his dark hair curled just slightly at his temples. He was a man burdened by something unseen, something he refused to name. His next words were quiet, almost a whisper. Where? In the West Wing. A muscle in his jaw tightened. You went into the West Wing? Lenora forced herself to meet his gaze. I could not help it, my lord. The door was open. And the portrait, his eyes darkened. You saw her painting? Yes. She hesitated. And more than that. His silence urged her to continue. She spoke to me. Lord Ravenshade exhaled sharply, stepping toward the window, gripping the sill as though bracing himself. His knuckles whitened. Lenora took a step closer, lowering her voice. Who was she, my lord? For a moment, she thought he might not answer. But then, Clara Ravenshade, he murmured. My brother's wife. Lenora's pulse quickened. Your brother? Lord Ravenshade turned to her fully now, his dark eyes unreadable. Yes. Edgar Ravenshade. He was the rightful heir of Blackveil. This house was his. What happened to him? Sebastian's gaze flickered with something dangerous. He is dead. Lenora swallowed. And Clara? Another silence. Then, slowly, he said, she was lost. Lost? Not dead. The distinction was deliberate. Lenora's hands clenched at her sides. Lost, how? He turned away, shaking his head. That is not a story I care to tell, Miss Ashbourne. But, I will say this only once. His voice was sharp now, each word a blade against the cold air. You must not return to the West Wing. Lenora inhaled. My lord, you must not. The warning was final, edged with something akin to desperation. You are here to care for Evangeline. That is all. Do not go looking for answers that do not concern you. But they did concern her. She had seen Clara. She had heard her voice in the dark. She had found the midnight gown upon her bed as though it were meant for her. Something bound her to this house, to Clara. And Lord Ravenshade knew far more than he was telling her. Lenora lifted her chin. Forgive me, my lord, but I cannot ignore what is right before me. Something is wrong in this house. Something is. He moved closer, his presence towering over her, his voice a dark whisper. You do not understand what you are inviting upon yourself. Lenora stood her ground, though her pulse pounded. Then help me understand. Lord Ravenshade exhaled through his nose, closing his eyes briefly before stepping back. His restraint was evident in the way he curled his fingers into fists, as though holding something back. After a long pause, he turned to the door. You are a clever woman, Miss Ashbourne. His voice was quieter now. But cleverness is not always an advantage in a house like this. He reached for the doorknob but hesitated. Without turning to face her, he added. If you see her again, do not speak to her. Do not follow her. And, above all, the candlelight flickered once more. His voice was barely more than a whisper now, but it sent a chill straight through Lenora's bones. Do not let her dress you. And then, before she could respond, he was gone. The door clicked softly shut behind him, sealing her alone in the quiet. Lenora remained frozen, his words twisting in her mind like a creeping vine. Do not let her dress you. As though it would be her choice. With trembling hands, she turned back to the bed. The bed cover had slipped slightly from where she had flung it. Beneath it, peeking out like a dark secret, the midnight gown still lay waiting. Chapter 7, The Portrait Speaks. The manor had fallen into silence, but the air in Lenora Ashbourne's chamber was heavy, too heavy. Lord Ravenshade's warning echoed in her mind, do not let her dress you. Lenora stood motionless, staring at the bed where the midnight gown lay beneath the bed cover. She had not placed it there. And yet, it remained. Waiting. A chill crept along her spine, her body rigid with the unshakable feeling that she was being watched. Slowly, she turned her head toward the mirror. For a moment, there was nothing. Just her reflection, pale and shaken. Then, a shadow flickered behind her. Lenora spun around, but the room was empty. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, but its glow did little to chase away the feeling that someone stood just beyond her sight. She needed air. She needed to leave this room. Without another glance at the gown, she grabbed her shawl and stepped into the hallway, her breathing shallow. The corridor was dimly lit, the sconces casting a dull golden glow against the dark wallpaper. The scent of wax and aged wood filled the air, but beneath it lingered something else, a faint trace of wilted roses. The scent was growing stronger. And it was coming from the west wing. Lenora's heart pounded. Lord Ravenshade had forbidden her from returning. But Clara Ravenshade was calling her. And Lenora knew she would not stop until she answered. The corridor leading to the forbidden wing felt colder than before. The flickering candle in her hand barely pushed back the shadows as she stepped cautiously into the long hallway. The portraits lining the walls seemed darker, more watchful. And at the end of the hall, Clara Ravenshade's portrait awaited. Lenora's breath hitched. The woman in the painting had not changed, and yet there was something different. The sadness in her expression had deepened. Her painted lips, once merely parted, now seemed to tremble. And her eyes? They were looking directly at Lenora. The air turned deathly cold. Then, from the silence, a whisper. Soft, delicate, like silk slipping through fingers. Come closer. Lenora swallowed, every nerve in her body urging her to turn back. But she did not. She stepped forward. The candle flickered wildly in her grip, the flame bending toward the portrait as though being pulled by some unseen force. She was close enough now to see the fine details of the painting, the lace at Clara's collar, the faint shadow beneath her dark eyes, the delicate silver embroidery of the midnight gown. Help me. The voice was closer now. Lenora's breath came in shallow gasps. What do you want? She whispered. The candle sputtered. The air in the corridor grew thick, suffocating, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Then, beneath her hand, the wooden frame of the portrait creaked. Lenora froze. She had not touched it. And yet, it was shifting, the canvas straining against its frame as if something inside was trying to push its way out. The whisper grew stronger. He took everything from me. A sharp gust of wind tore through the corridor, though there were no open windows. The flame of Lenora's candle was extinguished. And the whisper turned into a cry. He took everything from me. The portrait lurched forward, the entire frame shuddering violently against the wall. Lenora stumbled backward, her hands flying to cover her ears as the whispering turned into a wretched sob. Then, silence. The air stilled. The weight pressing against Lenora's chest lifted slightly, and she forced herself to look back at the portrait. Clara Ravenshade's sorrowful gaze remained frozen in paint. But now, her hands were different. Lenora's stomach turned. The portrait's hands had always rested delicately in her lap. But now, one hand had moved. It was no longer resting on her gown. It was pointing directly at the far wall. Lenora turned her gaze slowly, heart hammering. The wall to her right was covered in faded wallpaper, cracked with age. But now that she was looking, really looking, she saw it. A faint seam in the wall. A door. Hidden. The whisper returned, so soft she almost thought she imagined it, "Find me." Lenora's pulse thundered in her ears. Her hands trembled as she reached for the candle, relighting it with shaking fingers. The glow revealed the faint outline of the hidden door more clearly now, a small handle barely visible beneath the layers of dust. This was what Clara wanted her to find. She hesitated only a moment before wrapping her fingers around the cold metal and pulling. At first, the door did not budge. It had been untouched for years, perhaps decades. But as Lenora pushed her weight against it, the wood groaned and finally gave way. A gust of cold, stale air spilled into the corridor. Beyond the door, a narrow passage stretched into darkness. It led downward. Lenora gripped her candle tighter, steeling herself. The whisper was gone now, but Clara's presence remained. She wanted Lenora to go deeper. To find what had been hidden. To uncover the truth. And Lenora knew there would be no turning back. Chapter 8, The Vanishing Maid. The hidden passage yawned before Lenora Ashbourne, swallowing the weak light of her candle. A breath of cold, stagnant air slithered past her, heavy with the scent of damp stone, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic. The passage led downward into darkness. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. She had two choices, step forward or turn back. But Lenora already knew she would not turn back. Clara Ravenshade had pointed her here. And whatever had been hidden within Blackveil Manor, whatever secrets Lord Ravenshade refused to speak of, lay beyond this door. With a deep breath, she lifted her candle and stepped inside. The wooden floor beneath her feet shifted, creaking beneath her weight as though protesting her presence. The air grew heavier with each step, the walls closing in around her. This passage had been sealed for a reason. And yet, someone, or something, wanted her to find it. Her fingers brushed along the cold stone as she descended the narrow staircase, the flickering candlelight casting jagged shadows that danced like grasping hands. A whisper of fabric. Lenora froze. The sound had come from behind her. She turned sharply, her heart hammering. The passage was empty, nothing but dust and darkness. Yet she could not shake the feeling that someone stood just beyond the light, watching. She swallowed hard and forced herself to move forward. The passage narrowed as it curved downward, the scent of damp earth growing stronger. A wooden door loomed ahead, its iron handle rusted with age. Lenora hesitated. Something about this place felt wrong. But she had come this far. She reached out and pushed the door open. It groaned loudly on its hinges, revealing a small, windowless room. The air inside was thick, suffocating. And against the far wall stood an old wooden bed with a rotting mattress. Lenora stepped inside cautiously, holding her candle aloft. The walls were made of cold, damp stone, their surface uneven with years of neglect. There were chains bolted into the wall beside the bed. A shiver ran through her. This had been a prison. Someone had been kept here. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of who had lived, or died, here. A rusted tray sat abandoned on the floor, its contents long decayed. A small, torn blanket lay crumpled in the corner, covered in dust. Then, her gaze fell upon something half buried beneath the bed frame. A small, faded shoe. Lenora's breath caught. It was not a noblewoman's slipper. It was a servant's shoe. A terrible thought crept into her mind. Who had been locked in this room? A sudden gust of air snuffed out her candle. Darkness swallowed her. Lenora gasped, stepping backward until her back hit the cold stone wall. The air shifted, pressing against her like something unseen was closing in. Then, a whisper. Soft. Fragile. Desperate. Miss? Lenora's breath hitched. It was not Clara. The voice was younger, trembling, full of fear. Miss, please, help me. Lenora's body went cold. She reached into her pocket, fumbling for the matches with shaking fingers. She struck one against the stone. The flame flashed to life. And then, the figure appeared. Lenora let out a sharp, choked gasp. A young maid stood in the farthest corner of the room, her body thin, too thin, her white apron torn and stained. Her face, gaunt, hollow, was streaked with something dark, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched at her own arms as though trying to hold herself together, her lips trembling as she whispered again. Please, don't let him find me. Lenora's breath came in short, shallow bursts. This girl, this maid, she was not alive. Lenora stumbled backward. The maid stepped forward. I didn't mean to see. I didn't mean to know. Her voice cracked. But he found out, and he, underscore. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the passage. The girl's face contorted in terror. Her hands flew to her throat. Lenora saw the bruises then. Fingerprints. Dark, deep, wrapping around the girl's neck. Lenora's stomach turned. "He took me away," the maid gasped, her voice breaking. "He said no one would ever find me." Lenora took another step back, her mind reeling. This was who the hidden room had belonged to. Not Clara, but a servant. A vanished maid. One who had been locked away and left to die. Lenora's pulse roared in her ears. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The girl's mouth opened, then the door slammed shut. The candle blew out. A scream, not Lenora's, but the girl's, then silence. Unholy silence. Lenora's hands trembled as she frantically struck another match. The flame flickered weakly. The maid was gone. Nothing remained but dust and darkness. Lenora staggered backward. Something in the air had changed. The shadows felt heavier, watching. And then, from the farthest corner of the room, a voice. Not the maid's. Something deeper. Colder. "You should not have come here." The match went out. Lenora ran. She crashed through the door, her feet pounding against the passage floor as she fled up the stairs. She did not stop. She did not breathe. She did not dare look back. The house was awake now. The secrets of Blackveil Manor had been stirred. And Lenora knew, the dead would not rest until the truth was revealed. Chapter 9, The Mirror's Reflection. Lenora Ashbourne did not stop running. The unseen whispers chased her, slipping through the dark passage like a cold breath against her neck. She fled up the narrow staircase, her pulse thundering, her candle long abandoned. The shadows twisted around her, the very air pressing against her skin as though the house itself was trying to pull her back. She burst into the main corridor of Blackveil Manor, her trembling hands grasping at the walls for balance. The air was warmer here, lighter, but the chill of the hidden room clung to her skin like the touch of the dead. The vanished maid. She had seen her. She had spoken to her. And she had learned something horrifying. Someone, a man, had found out she had seen something she should not have. And for that, she had been taken. Left in the darkness. Forgotten. Murdered. Lenora pressed a hand to her chest, trying to still the erratic beating of her heart. She wanted to believe the girl had been just a vision, a remnant of a past long buried. But the marks. The bruises around her throat. They had been real. Lenora exhaled shakily and turned toward her chamber. She needed light, warmth, something to remind her she was still part of the living. She reached her door and shoved it open, stepping inside quickly before bolting it behind her. The fire in the hearth had burned low, its embers glowing faintly. Shadows flickered along the walls, stretching across the dark wooden floor. For the first time since arriving at Blackveil, she felt afraid to look at the mirror. She crossed the room carefully, avoiding glancing at it as she reignited the candle by her bedside. The moment the flame caught, she let out a slow breath. Warm light bathed the room, pushing back the dark corners. Lenora finally lifted her gaze. And froze. The reflection in the mirror was wrong. At first, she couldn't place it. It was her, standing there in her nightdress, her dark hair tousled from running. But something about the way she stood, the way she was looking at herself, made the hairs on her arms rise. It was subtle. Too subtle. She lifted a hand slowly. The reflection did the same. She took a hesitant step forward. So did the image in the mirror. And then, as she stared closer, she saw it. The eyes. Her reflection's eyes were not her own. The breath in Lenora's throat caught. Because she had seen those sorrowful eyes before. Clara Ravenshade. A whisper brushed against her ears, but it did not come from the room. It came from inside the mirror. "Help me." The reflection's lips moved, but Lenora's own lips did not. She stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping her. The mirror's surface shivered, a faint ripple spreading across the glass. And then, a handprint appeared. Not on her side of the mirror, but from within. Pale, fragile fingers pressed against the glass, as though something trapped inside was reaching for her. Lenora's body seized with terror. This was no illusion. Clara Ravenshade was in the mirror. And she was trying to get out. The flickering candlelight wavered as another whisper crawled through the air, "He will come for you, too." Lenora's breath came in ragged gasps, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The mirror's surface rippled again, the reflection shifting, Clara's hand pressing more insistently against the glass. Then, a violent crack. A jagged fracture split across the mirror's surface, spreading like a web of veins. Lenora's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled backward as a deep, guttural sound, low and unnatural, echoed from the mirror. The candle in her hand snuffed out. Darkness crashed down upon her. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own frantic breathing. Then, a whisper. "Too close. It's already begun." The fireplace flared to life, flames bursting from the dying embers, bathing the room in flickering gold. Lenora gasped, pressing a hand to her racing heart. The mirror was silent now. The reflection had returned to normal, her own face staring back, wide-eyed and pale. The handprint was gone. But the fracture remained. A single, jagged crack split through the center of the glass. Lenora staggered toward the bed, gripping the edge of the mattress to keep herself steady. The house, Blackveil Manor, was waking up. She knew now. She was not merely a guest here. She was a part of the story. The past was unburying itself, creeping back from the shadows, and it would not rest until its truth was fully revealed. She had seen Clara's portrait. She had heard the vanished maid's cries. And now, Clara had spoken to her directly. Lenora inhaled shakily and turned her gaze to the cracked mirror one last time. It had not broken by accident. It was a warning. And she feared it would not be the last. Chapter 10, A Love Doomed by Betrayal. The crack in the mirror stared back at Lenora Ashbourne like a wound in the glass, a jagged fracture slicing through her own reflection. The room was silent now, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily upon her chest. Clara Ravenshade was trapped. Not merely in memory, not merely in the whispers that haunted the corridors of Blackveil Manor, but somewhere beyond, inside the very fabric of the house itself. And she had spoken. "He took everything from me. He will come for you, too." Lenora swallowed hard, her body still trembling from the encounter. What had Clara meant? Who was he? A sickening thought crept into her mind. Could she have meant Lord Ravenshade himself? Lenora pressed a hand to her forehead. She needed to think. The ghosts of Blackveil were not just memories of the past. They were reaching out, trying to reveal something that had been buried. Something Clara had died for. The wind howled beyond the windows, rattling the glass panes. The fire had burned low once more, casting the chamber into deep shadows. The room was still, yet the feeling of being watched lingered. She needed to know more. And there was only one person who might tell her the truth. Evangeline. Morning came in slow, muted shades of grey, the sky hanging heavy with clouds. The house remained eerily quiet, as if Blackveil itself held its breath. Lenora found Evangeline Ravenshade in the nursery, seated on the window seat, staring out toward the endless, misty moors. She had not yet spoken a word. Lenora had expected no childish laughter from the girl, but there was something deeply unsettling about how still she was. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her long blonde hair tumbling over her small shoulders. But what truly unsettled Lenora was what Evangeline held in her hands. A small, withered blue rose. The exact shade of Clara's midnight gown. Lenora approached carefully. "Good morning, Evangeline." The child did not turn. She continued staring out the window, her small fingers twisting the fragile rose between them. Evangeline, Lenora tried again, her voice softer. The girl finally blinked, shifting her gaze to Lenora. Her dark, unreadable eyes locked onto hers, as if assessing her. "Did you dream of her again?" Lenora asked carefully. Evangeline hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Lenora felt a deep chill settle into her bones. "Do you know why she's still here?" Evangeline lifted the withered rose, rolling it between her fingers. "Because she is waiting." Lenora inhaled. "Waiting for what?" A long silence. Then, a whisper. "For someone to finish what she could not." Lenora's skin prickled. "And what was that?" Evangeline turned her head slightly, as though listening to something unseen. Then, her small fingers pointed toward the armoire in the corner of the nursery. Lenora followed her gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The armoire was an ornate, heavy thing, its dark wood polished to an eerie sheen. Slowly, she rose from her seat and crossed the room. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight as she reached the armoire and curled her fingers around the cold brass handle. The door groaned open. Inside, amongst Evangeline's neatly folded dresses and toys, lay something that did not belong. Lenora reached in, her fingers grazing the cool metal of an antique jewelry box. She lifted it carefully. The box was small, its surface inlaid with dark ebony and silver filigree. A lock kept it sealed shut, the tiny keyhole winking up at her like an unblinking eye. Lenora turned back to Evangeline. "Where did you find this?" The little girl's voice was barely a whisper. "It was always here." Lenora's fingers tightened around the box. "Do you know what's inside?" Evangeline shook her head. Lenora exhaled, glancing at the lock. She needed to find a key. She turned back to Evangeline, but the child's gaze had drifted to the window once more. "Evangeline," she said softly. "Do you know who she loved?" The little girl's fingers stilled. Then, ever so softly, "She loved a man she was never meant to love." Lenora's breath caught. Evangeline blinked, lowering her voice. "And he betrayed her." The antique jewelry box sat upon Lenora's writing desk, its dark surface gleaming in the candlelight. She had searched her own chamber, Evangeline's nursery, even the grand staircase, but the key was nowhere to be found. Something told her she needed to look deeper, somewhere hidden. Her mind returned to the forbidden West Wing. And to Clara's portrait. Lenora's hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the jewelry box, its cold weight heavy in her palms. What could be inside? A letter? A token of love? Something so dangerous that it had been locked away? Her breath came slow and measured. If Clara had loved someone she was never meant to love, then who had betrayed her? A nobleman? A servant? A raven shade? A deep sense of unease coiled inside Lenora's chest. There was only one way to find out. She would return to Clara's portrait. She would find the key. And she would uncover the truth Blackveil Manor had buried. For Clara. For the vanished maid. And for herself. Because now, Lenora was part of this story. And it was far from over. Chapter 11, The Night of the Ball. The rain began to fall as Lenora Ashbourne made her way back to the West Wing, her candle flickering as she descended into the corridor where Clara Ravenshade's portrait waited. The scent of dust and aged wood filled the air, but beneath it, that unmistakable trace of withered roses. She knew what she was searching for. The key to the locked jewelry box sat somewhere within this house, and something told her it was connected to Clara's portrait. Her boots pressed against the wooden floor, the echoes of her own footsteps following her like shadows. As she approached, the candlelight illuminated the portrait's delicate features. The midnight gown. The sorrowful gaze. And the hand pointing toward the wall. Lenora's breath hitched. It had been real. Clara had changed. And she was leading her somewhere. With trembling fingers, Lenora touched the frame of the portrait, feeling the cool ridges of the carved wood. There had to be something hidden here. Then, a whisper. Not from behind her. Not from the corridor. But from the painting itself. Remember the ball. Lenora's breath hitched. She stepped back, her pulse hammering. The ball? What ball? The manor had been silent and lifeless for years, haunted by the whispers of its past. There had been no grand gatherings, no music or laughter. Unless she was not meant to remember her own time. But Clara's. A gust of wind blew through the corridor, though there were no open windows. The candle flame shuddered violently. Then, suddenly, a sharp, metallic sound. Lenora turned toward the base of the portrait. There, lying on the wooden floor just beneath the frame, was a key. Her pulse quickened. It had not been there before. Something, or someone, had placed it for her to find. She hesitated, then bent down and picked it up. The small silver key was intricate, its handle designed with swirling filigree. It was the perfect size for the jewelry box. Lenora swallowed hard. She needed to return to her chamber. But as she turned, the candle flickered out. And everything changed. Music. Soft, distant, hauntingly beautiful. Lenora gasped, her body stiffening as the corridor shifted around her. The walls brightened, the decayed wallpaper smoothing, the dusty sconces now gleaming with fresh candlelight. She was no longer in her own time. Blackveil was alive. And she was standing in the midst of a grand ball. The air buzzed with voices, laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses. A golden glow illuminated the walls, chandeliers gleaming above as couples waltzed across the marble floor. The manor was no longer a place of shadows and sorrow, it was magnificent. And yet, something was wrong. The laughter was too hollow. The candle flames too still. And when Lenora turned her gaze toward the ballroom mirror, her breath caught. The dancers had no reflections. She swallowed, her heart pounding. What was this? Then, the crowd parted. And she saw her. Clara Ravenshade. Alive. Standing at the center of the ballroom in her midnight gown, just as she had appeared in the portrait. Her face was radiant yet shadowed with something sorrowful, her dark eyes scanning the room as though searching for someone. Lenora could not move. This was Clara's last night at Blackveil. And she was watching it unfold. A presence stirred beside her. A man. Tall, imposing, dressed in raven black formal wear. His sharp jaw was partially obscured by the flickering light of the chandeliers, but there was something familiar about him. Lenora turned toward him, but before she could see his face, the music faltered. A breath of silence. Then, a scream. Lenora's body went rigid as the entire ballroom shifted. The golden glow faded. The guests vanished. The chandeliers dimmed, their light flickering like dying stars. And Clara, she was no longer standing. She was kneeling on the ballroom floor, her hands gripping the fabric of her gown, her chest heaving with despair. She was crying. Lenora stepped forward, her voice catching. Clara? Clara's head lifted sharply, her dark eyes locking onto Lenora's. And then, in a voice torn with grief, she whispered. He betrayed me. The walls of the ballroom shook. The candles flickered violently. The chandeliers above groaned, their glass trembling, as though the entire house was reliving the moment of Clara's ruin. And then, Lenora saw him. The man in black. The same man who had stood beside her before. He was moving toward Clara now, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor. His gloved hand reached for her shoulder, his fingers curling too tightly around her arm. Clara let out a choked sob, trying to pull away. He did not let go. You will do as I say. The voice was low, dark, filled with quiet menace. Lenora's body seized. She knew that voice. She had heard it before. She had spoken to him. Lord Sebastian Ravenshade. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. No? It couldn't be. Clara shook her head, her dark curls falling loose as she whispered desperately. Please, don't do this. Lord Ravenshade's grip tightened. You know too much. Clara let out a soft sob. But I love him. Lord Ravenshade's expression did not change. And that was your mistake. A final whisper, too soft for Clara to hear, but loud enough for Lenora to understand. I warned you, Miss Ashbourne. You should not have come here. Then. Everything shattered. The ballroom plunged into darkness. The walls cracked. The chandeliers exploded, shards of glass raining down like falling stars. Lenora let out a cry, throwing her arms up to shield herself, then, silence. Cold. Darkness. She gasped, her hands clutching at the floor beneath her. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was back in her chamber, sprawled on the rug before the fireplace. The silver key sat beside her. The house was silent once more. But Lenora knew the truth now. Clara had been betrayed. And Lord Ravenshade, the man who had warned her, who had looked into her eyes with unreadable sorrow, had been part of it. He had taken everything from her. And now, history was repeating itself. Lenora clutched the key in her trembling fingers. She would open the jewelry box. And she would uncover the final truth. Because Clara Ravenshade had waited long enough.
Every story has an ending. But some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.